Hello, everybody. Welcome back to our TLTS research seminar. And 新年快乐，恭喜发财. It's Happy Lunar New Year, and wishing everybody a very nice year of the snake ahead. And today we are very, very happy to have an old friend of ours, Professor Stephen Talmy, with us. And Professor Stephen Talmy is right now associate professor at the UBC, University of British Columbia, in Vancouver, Canada. And Stephen needs a literary introduction. He's very well versed in the research methodology of seeing interview as social practice, as co-constructed. And without further delay, I will hand over the speaking turn to Stephen for a presentation first before we join in the discussion. Stephen, over to you.
Oh, great. Thank you. Thank you so much, Angel. Let me just share my screen and I will get going here. Okay. There we go. Hopefully you can see that. And now I have to find it here on my window. Okay, good. So yeah, wow. Thank you, Angel, and all of you for inviting me to talk to your group today. I've been looking through your amazing catalog of talks, and I'm just really honored to be here and to be part of what you're doing. So I am Stephen Talmy. I'm a critical linguistic ethnographer and ESL teacher educator here at UBC. And I'm speaking to you today as a settler on the traditional lands of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh people. I'd like to acknowledge the traditional caretakers of the lands where everyone else is zooming or streaming in from. And this practice of land acknowledgement is just one of the ways that I can enact principles in my work from the 94 calls to action from the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada. And if you'd like to talk more about this in the Q&A, I'd be happy to. I think it becomes an opportunity for us to do so. The title of my talk is Analyzing Interviews as Social Practice. And by that, I mean analyzing interviews as participation in social practice. So I'm going to start by talking about interviews in the so-called interview society, the need to theorize interviews, and then what would that would entail from a social practice perspective. I'm mostly using the slides I made for a webinar from last November, though hopefully we'll be able to listen to some data this time. So analyzing interviews as social practice means theorizing interviews as social practice as well. And I'll note that there are plenty of other theories out there, several of which I've drawn from in my own work, just a sampling of which include mining, for instance, which involves the excavation of knowledge from the interviewee, to traveling, where the interviewee and the interviewer travel together to collaboratively arrive at insights from the interview talk. There's this factist theoretical perspective where we look at the interview content exclusively versus a specimen perspective where we look at the interview itself as a site of investigation. There's the resource and topic distinction. There are active interviews. There are naturalistic approach to theorizing interviews. There's a romantic conception of interviews, a critical conception, decolonizing, constructionist, and so on. Lots of different theories of interview out there. And the way that I have conceived of interview theory in my terms is in terms of a research instrument and as a social practice. And I'll be talking particularly today about analyzing interviews as a social practice. So really, before we talk about analyzing interviews as a social practice, it's important to talk about why we need to theorize or research interviews at all. Or do we need to? I think the answer is yes. Look at this diagram. Over on the left, we have us. This will be familiar to those of you who are at the webinar. On the left, we have us. As you can see, I've enlisted DAL-E to help with these illustrations, and some of the weird little quirks of DAL-E indeed appear. But on the left, we have us, applied linguists who aim to use qualitative research interviews in our studies. But as I am hoping to convey over here on the right, we are also people, although sometimes it doesn't necessarily feel like that, we are also people who have lives outside of academia with rich experiential histories and, again, diverse backgrounds and beliefs and values. Exposed to a particular set of ideas about what an interview is and what it yields. As we've seen possibly tens of thousands of interviews on TV, on radio, on the net. We participated in job interviews, in medical interviews with our doctors. We participated in polls. We participated in focus groups. We've even been interviewed on the news. And we've also talked about the content of all these interviews with each other, with our friends, with family. So these interviews have a great presence in our lives. This is just another way of saying that we already have a very good idea determined long before we ever decided to become an applied linguist of what an interview is. And that is due to the Interview Society, as Atkinson and Silverman famously put it years ago, and its pervasive role of interview-like exchanges in shaping contemporary social life. So in the Interview Society, the interview is considered a confessional space, which provides us access to the truth that the interviewee yields. And this is a truth that can be validated in numerous ways. Language tends to be conceived as referentially, as a conduit to the interior self revealed in the interview. First-person narratives become imbued with vivid and unadulterated authenticity. The interview is conceived as this instrument for extracting this authenticity from the communicable self. And as Atkinson and Silverman argue, the interview in this particular sense becomes a Foucauldian technology, which invents notions of subjectivity and collective social and political patterns, and importantly, obscures their operation beneath notions of objectivity and science. And we can just consider our own concerns as researchers with bias in our interviews, with leading questions, with validity, and so forth. These are all they're all in part of the Interview Society. So going back to our AI-drawn picture here, the concern is when we take these perspectives on interviews that we've developed over our lives in the Interview Society, represented here on the right of your screen, and we bring them or import them into our work in applied linguistics without question. Because, as I'm arguing now, how we conceive of interviews has a profound impact on how we carry them out in practice and how we analyze them. So this is essentially what I'm calling for. A, that we explicitly theorize our interviews, and B, that as qualitative researchers, that our theorization of the interview extends beyond referentiality, beyond simple summary of propositional content, moving from an exclusive attention to the what of the interview to a dual focus on what and how. And that is how language and other semiotic conduct is used to do the interview, to construct interview content, to describe L2 learning or use or pedagogy, transsemiotization or translanguaging, whatever it is your research focus is. In other words, as applied linguists and language researchers and educators and so on, we are also participants in the social processes that we study, and our field uniquely affords us the ability to study them if we actually decide to do that. Unfortunately, despite calls in the social sciences that have gone back at least to the 1960s, that we both theorize our interviews and analyze them as sites of communicative activity. So despite this, we still see a great deal of influence from the Interview Society on social scientific research practice today, writ large. And here is what to me is some kind of evidence of that influence on our research. First, there's usually little or no mention of the interview itself. let alone interview theory. My experience has been that research that doesn't mention interview theory tends to rely on tacit or unexamined theories of the interview that range between what have been called neo-positivist orientations for quantitative research and naturalistic orientations for qualitative research. There tend to be abundant summaries of data, perhaps accompanied by a display of representative quotes. There's a deletion of the interviewer's involvement in the interviewer, and importantly as well, a deletion of the interview setup. And that is to say the auspices under which participants have been recruited to be interviewees. Have they been recruited as parents or as students or as bilingual students or as lawyers or whatever it is? And each of those categories comes with different inferential frames and connotations attached to the interpretations we can take from data about them. So there also tends to be this focus on propositional content, usually through summaries and direct quotes that give voice to the sort of hidden self that is revealed through the interview. And there also tends to be a lack of lack of action orientation in analysis. Just focus on the interview content as opposed to what's happening in the interview itself. So let me come back to this notion of interview theory. I'm a critical linguistic ethnographer and discourse analyst with a theoretical background that bridges critical theory and social constructionism and sociolinguistics. And due to this disciplinary background, I conceive of language learning and use as participation in social practice. Therefore, due to theoretical compatibility, which I think is important. Some people don't, but I adopt a constructionist perspective on the interview in my research, what I call the interview as social practice. And I theorize the interview as a site in which versions of events, of phenomena, of emotions, and so much more are co-constructed in situated interaction between interviewer and interviewee. And you saw this in the papers today by both Baker and by myself. So this is really different from how a neo-positivist or a naturalist would theorize the interview and analyze the data, as they effectively would treat the interview as basically an instrument for collecting content. So yes, this is the constructionist perspective, and I would identify this more again with the theoretical background that I adopt in just sort of in larger qualitative theoretical perspective, situated learning, communities of practice is a perspective that I find very rich and rewarding, productive. And over here we would have interview as research instrument, which I would argue is considerably, maybe the bulk of empirical research in applied linguistics these days. And that is both quantitative and qualitative that takes a more naturalistic perspective on data. So implications for interview practice from these different perspectives. As a research instrument, we would consider the interview as a tool for collecting information rather than a site for inquiry itself, as we would in a social practice perspective. Data are considered reports of truths and facts and mental states of self-disclosing respondents from a research instrument perspective, whereas from a social practice point of view, interview data become accounts or versions or narratives of truths, facts, mental states, and so forth, co-constructed between interviewee and interviewer. The interview gives voice to the interviewee from a research instrument perspective, whereas from a social practice perspective, voice is something that is collaboratively co-constructed between the interviewer and the interviewee. It's something that there's not a sort of unitary self hidden behind the voice that is giving voice to the voice, as might be connoted from a research instrument perspective. Bias from a research instrument perspective, there's a major concern with data contamination, with leading questions and so forth. Whereas in a social practice perspective, data can't be contaminated. They're just data. We just analyze them. We analyze them for what they are. The analytic approach that is often taken in a research instrument perspective is as content or thematic analysis, or where data summary, simple quotation, whereas in a social practice perspective, you would take a more processual approach to the data, looking at the interview co-construct, how knowledge is co-constructed. And the analytic focus in a research instrument being more product oriented, whereas in a social practice, there's also interest in the product, of course, in what, but there's also this attention on the process, that these data aren't sort of naturally floating out there in the ether, that they've been generated in a particular socio-cultural context. So there are multiple ways I could go here to demonstrate what a social practice perspective might look like in action and analytic action. So the two readings use a range of analytic affordances from discourse analysis and CA, conversation analysis, and MCA, membership categorization analysis. And this is Baker's just so much wonderful interactional data. And you can see here some of the detail here, and whereas in my transcripts, in my article, they're even more detailed, timing down to the tenth of a second. This is just to show you these are one way to analyze data from a social practice perspective. It's not the only way, and you don't need to do a discourse analysis in order to do an interview a social practice perspective. You just need to conceive of the interview as a communicative event. So rather than do some kind of microanalysis, let's keep this simple. I have an interesting bit of interview data that comes from a website called New South Voices in North Carolina. It's less than 2 minutes. I'll play it just once, so listen carefully. There's a small twist right at the end of the interview that you need to listen for. And the context is, this is data generation for an interview study about childhood experiences with print literacy. And MC is interviewing JC about JC's experience reading books as a child. And so I'll just play, it's about 2 minutes, and so let's just listen.
What kinds of things did you remember reading when you started to read?
I read some of the same books that they had read to me first, and then as I got older, I just got hungry for books, and I read. My parents had a lot of books. They had bookshelves that my daddy built, that were built-in bookshelves, and they were filled up with books. And one summer, I remember when I was a teenager, I just made it a mission to read as many of those books as I could, and I thought they were fiction, most of them. There were some history books in there too, but I plowed through a bunch of them that summer. I just kept reading until I probably had read almost every one of them.
Do you remember any of the names of them?
They were bestseller type fiction from the 40s and 50s and 60s and on. Mm-hmm. They were members of a book club, and they got a lot of books that way. And whatever they got, I read.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's see. So do you think that those experiences helped you figure out the kinds of things that you like to read? Like what the stories that they told you and read to you?
Well, it must have, because I still read fiction. I still read history. I love historical novels. I love to read even just plain history. It must have rubbed off in some aspect, because that's the kind of thing I still read.
Mm-hmm. Well, do you think it also helped you when you became a parent that you naturally wanted to read to your kids?
Yeah, I've always been a reader, and I've always been read to, so I think, yes. I mean, I did read to my children, to you guys, to you and your brothers, and what was that?
I'm just wondering if you managed to catch that right at the very end. If not, don't worry. We'll look at a fragment of the transcript in just a moment. But for now, let's just imagine that we have these data and these interview data, and we're going to look at a sort of a sample analysis and data display from what I would consider to be a research instrument perspective. So let's just have a look at this. So this is this is my idea of what it might look like. So several participants felt that their early childhood literacy experiences had an impact on how they socialized their own children into print literate practices. And then here's the quote from the interview that we just listened to. My parents had a lot of books. They had bookshelves and they were filled up with books. And one summer, I just made it a mission to read as many of those books as I could. Bestseller fiction from the 40s, 50s, and 60s. It must have rubbed off in some aspect. I'd always been a reader, always been read to. So yes, I read to my children too. So I always wonder when there's those brackets around words in transcripts. I always wonder what's happening behind those brackets. I read to my children too. Indeed, what's happening behind those brackets? Well, we'll look in just a moment, but I would characterize this as a research instrument perspective because the data are just presented at face value. There's no analysis of language, there's no interaction analysis, there's nothing on co-construction, there's nothing on how the data were generated. Though the topic of literacy socialization is certainly view. And we don't know much about them as people beyond what they're talking about with JC's experiences with literacy. Then there's a fascinating introduction here of the parent category, which ironically, as we soon learn, makes relevant the relational pair of children. And then there's this devastating pronoun switch here, which reveals this previously undisclosed relationship between MC and JC, that is mother and a child. I mean, we have a child and a parent talking about childhood literacy, which is what our study is about. Do you think perhaps this relationship might have had something to do with how the interview was done, what was said? Well, obviously what was said, right? So this remarkable bit of data calls attention to a useful way of to approach analysis of interview data, and that is in the distinction that's been introduced by Jacobson decades ago between the narrating event and the narrated event. So in other words, we have JC and MC here doing the interview. This would be called the narrating event. And then we have what the interview is about, and that is JC's experiences with literacy, and that is the narrated event. And essentially what we're talking about, well, actually, since we need to continue this because we're critical researchers, so we also need to consider power, politics, representation, this wider context here. So all of these frames are fitted together. But what happens often is that maybe we're talking about what's happening in the narrated event, but not what's happening in the narrating event. And basically what Baker and I have been arguing for, and what I'm saying in this talk is that let's pay attention what's going on in the narrating event. There's some interesting stuff. So here's some questions that I posted for us today. We're happy to talk about these. I thought they might be a jumping off point, or we can not address them at all. But I was thinking that we might talk about what a social practice analysis of those data that we just listened to might be, how the interviewee and interviewee construct this interaction as an interview, what the theory of interview you think the interactants seem to adopt. And if this were a study about parents' literacy socialization practices, what might an alternative conception of interview yield for analysis? And then we can throw that out to transsemiotization and translanguaging and bring all of these topics. So I'll just let's open it up to Q&A. I guess I can stop sharing. Is that right? Okay, great. So just lots to talk about. And I also have your questions that you sent me, so let me pull those up as well. So I'm happy to go whichever direction you'd like to go, Angel.
Thank you so much, Steve. This is really wonderful presentation. And we have 17 watching. So hi, those who are watching. Please give us a like. We only have 8 likes. Okay. And also please press the subscribe button so that you get all the new videos. We are planning to have smaller videos on keywords that will be coming up, like keywords like agency. Everybody's talking about agency. What exactly is agency, right? So we will have short videos made by our team members, our postdocs, our research students. Coming back to Steve has opened up a new, very interesting discussion. And I could see that those of us here all have a different take. I like to summarize those different takes so that you don't see those questions as going in different directions. They're quite cohesive, they hang together. I think I'll start with Chung Hong's direction. Chung Hong's direction is the authorship of research, because tons of researchers are just using interviews as their research data, like what we call using this as data as the milk cows, and then they are milking the cow. But exactly what's the authorship? That's Chung Hong's concern, because the participants never get acknowledged. They co-create, co-generate. I really like your idea of data generation, not data collection, right? So Chung Hong's concern is about research, authorship, and the voices. Whose voice and who is claiming authorship? And then I think Niang, right now Niang as a postdoc at the Education University of Hong Kong, Niang is engaged in a project on human AI sociality, human AI relationality. And then Stephen, your research is really very helpful, because as interactional sociolinguists, ethnographers of communication, critical discourse analysts, we have never encountered this brave new world. Now we are now analyzing not human interactions, but some entity. I won't call it machine, because this machine might have agency, again, whatever definition we give to agency. So Liang's concern is, how do we analyze this? You can see it as an interview, right? We are prompting, we're interviewing the AI, right? And the AI can be interviewing us too. So it's a brave new world. That's Liang's concern and question. And then we have Chenghua and Phoebe, who are involved in our project here. Our project is Theorizing plurilingual assessment, because language assessment, education assessment has been so much monolingual. So we are doing this project trying to theorize, not just saying, oh, we need to translanguage everything, but what's the theory behind this, right? That you say this IELTS, for example, TOEFL, IELTS speaking test, so important, high stakes test. Is it a real reflection of the student, the learner's so-called proficiency, speaking proficiency? Because this interview is co-constructed, right? So the interviewer is part of the measurement, okay? The instrument is part of the measured, right? So your theory is so important for addressing these research questions. And then we also have my own very basic question about the CA people, right? Back in Bonghi's question, actually, back in the 60s, Harvey Sachs and the godfather of CA, right? At that time, we didn't have multimodal tape recording equipment, just the tape recorder, just the audio. So Bonghi's question is, right now we have multimodal, but then there's so much. Bonghi's question is so much. There must some selection of the kind of data that enters into your social construction and analysis. You cannot analyze so many things happening in the context, in the spatial context, right? I think that's kind of Bonghi's concern. And then Phoebe has interestingly generated a dialogue between Steve and AI. So actually, the president of my university, Professor John Lee, has got a digital twin. So there's a digital AI digital professor John Nee, okay, who can write speeches, make speeches in Professor Lee's style, speaking style, writing style. So sometimes you think you're interviewing a human person, but then you're interacting. It's kind of like a answer question. In this brave new world, we are interacting with some entities. Sometimes we don't know, right? In some scams, I mean, they pose as your romance partner or financial consultant. In some scam artists are very sophisticated now. So, and all these are new questions, but I think your theorization of the interview event can speak to all of these new concerns, new questions. So over to you.
Wow, wonderful. Thanks, Angel. There's just so much to talk about. I'm gonna invite everybody on the panel to go ahead and speak up as you like, rather than this just be a monologic thing. I'm not very good at monologic anyway, so please chime in. But yeah, I thought some of your questions were. I have actually questions for you too, and I would love to. So I will put a pin in that, and we'll come back to that. But just going through some of your questions, I thought some of the things that came up that were very interesting in Phoebe's. He just asked AI some questions about to summarize this paper of mine, and it says here, so acknowledge interaction dynamics, recognize interviews are co-constructed, and for both interviewer and interviewee, which can lead to richer, more nuanced data. And just as I was reading that, I was thinking, yeah, of course, that's really, really important. And I would think that for transsemioticization, that would be absolutely enormously important for you all to be considering as well. So your question inspired a question for me that I wonder if maybe we can just talk about now, and that is, what is the extent to which translanguaging or transsemiotization couldn't be accounted for in a social practice? I mean, how do you not do it? I mean, you have to look at you have to adopt a social practice perspective to talk about the translanguaging or the transsemiotization in your interviews, right? And it sparked this really amazing memory of. Suresh Kanagaraja has this wonderful paper from 2008 in Journal of Sociolinguistics about Tamil language shift in diasporic communities, in 3 diasporic communities. And there's all kinds of language shifting in the interviews itself, from Tamil to English to sort of, I think, an accented version of English. And yet, Suresh, for some reason, doesn't analyze the translanguaging that is going on in the interviews, in the interviews he's conducting, the different language shift that's happening in the interview itself. So I was just thinking how, as someone who's interested in translanguaging or transsemiotization, how do you not look at interaction in the interview? And I'll just open it up to you all if anyone would like to respond.
Reese, it's really exciting because in the research articles, everything translated into English. Usually, the reporting of the interview data,
right,
and then the translanguaging and the transsemiotizing, like the facial expressions, the gestures, the eye gaze, they all goes into, as Steve you mentioned, goes into this co-construction of the account of narrative of what's produced. So Phoebe, you want to say something because you started this?
Thank you for the discussion just now. Yeah, because nowadays I feel less lonely as a researcher, because why I pose all these example and question, because as researcher we need to be dialogic, but still to many of us, the academic background and the use of English as their target language for academic publications always refrain me personally to express myself really fully with all my communicative repertoires. And also I like Stephen's discussion about memories and experience because it's very personalized. And that's why it aroused my interest and concern about how AI may play some roles for us to push the limits and boundary. Because with all the visualization and also the translanguaging, transsematizing experience, I'm thinking about how AI may help us to understand different language minorities or the Aboriginal people in Canada and Australia better, because I need to really have more resources than just academic language to understand their social practice and life and culture. And that's my intake from your reading, and also how I interact a bit with AI to guess what will be your stance or perspective towards this. Yeah, maybe for others to join in. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I actually agreed with what the AI said. I would probably say I thought it was quite good, and I actually fed your extract into AI on my side and asked it to come up with it. It just got, and then I was like, okay, this is too crazy. But yeah, I think you know, I think one of the things that comes up is as you were talking about, something that you were all raising as well, is the issue of how do you, if you're especially if you're working in transsemiotics where you're looking at all kinds of meaning making systems, how do you choose? Is it from your, so this comes to the question that Angel raised earlier about data selection. There's so much. What do you focus on? And now multimodal and materiality. I mean, this objects now have some sort of presence or in the environment. There's all sorts of really I think important things that you can look at, but there's just so many of them. So how do you choose yourselves in your own research in the studies that you all are conducting or hope to conduct?
I guess I want to refer to Paul Thibault, he's visiting professor here. He's evolutionary psychologist and social semiotics scholar. I hesitate to say linguist because it's more than linguist, because looking at all the other semiotic systems, meaning making resource systems. So he's saying that we are constantly selecting, like right now we are interviewing each other. So it depends on our purpose at that moment, and that purpose can be changing, shifting. So a lot of our researchers, especially those PhD students who just take one qualitative research methodology course, then they will prematurely narrow their purpose for that social event. Say, oh, my purpose is to extract like tooth extraction, extract that kind of data. Positivist, right? Like there is a tooth there, I need to extract the tooth. There is some truth there in the interviewees, I need to extract. So a lot of PhD students, researchers in training, they think, oh, my purpose is to extract those pieces of truth and facts from my preconceived checklist, my questions. Then that will, of course, the self-fulfilling prophecy, you will just extract what you want to extract. You will just focus your attention on what you think you can get, right? So that's one take on it. And then the selection is going on all the time, and it's shifting, and depends on the dynamic, meaning the relationship, the relationality, that sometimes your interviewee becomes your friend. So this relationality, and sometimes suddenly it also becomes your children. Okay, in your example, right? Suddenly, it might start off as a formal interview, as your example showed. That is the informant and then the interviewer, and then the dynamic shifts. Towards the end of your interview example, the dynamic changes. Suddenly, I want to say that I'm your parent. Okay, I was your mother, right? So this intentionality shifts and changes, this relationality dynamic changes, we cannot predict. But if we prematurely foreclose, okay, this is my intention for this event. I just want to extract this piece of information from you. Then of course we will not select. Maybe Bongi, you posted that question, so maybe you can say something about that.
Yeah. So I have lot of questions, and I haven't and a lot of immature questions, and then and one of the questions that I'm constantly thinking is the tensions between what and how. In your study, in your paper, it is not something different. It's just the way that how we understand in a heuristic manner, and it's not like a binary. We can focus on like what and how to a certain degree, depending on the kinds of research questions that we have and so forth. But over the years, I feel it's not, what and hows are not compatible anymore. It feels like it's more of one extreme to the other extreme. For example, those people who are conceive interview as facts and data, and then the reality tend to focus on what. And those of the people who emphasize the co-construction tend to focus on the co-construction of the interview. And there's no middle ground at all. And I am kind of always being caught in the middle of, okay, I have to choose one or the other. And then it comes down to then what is it even necessary to even go beyond the referential fact, what the participant said, rather than going beyond and then looking in more details on the interaction, if the research question is just focusing on what the participants have said. So is it even an issue, or I'm still struggling. I don't have answers for it. Even when I look at your interview, the data that you showed, some of the summary, the summary that your participants provided, where the researcher has a square brackets, it still shows the parents' literacy socialization practice. But there is a shift in where the interviewee becomes the interviewer, and then shift the frame. But is it important to know and then go be more than that? And I have more questions than the answers, and I don't have any answers, and so I don't know. Like, would you be able to answer some of it?
Thanks, Bongi. They're always fun questions. Thanks. Yeah, they're great questions. I think, I think they're questions that we are the kinds of questions that we struggle with and wrestle with all our careers. How can I make my what-how analysis balanced so that it's not too much attention on the how, not too much attention or exclusive attention on the what? How can I do that? And I think there are multiple ways, and we could even go back to those data that we listened to right at the very end of my presentation and try and come up with something, because I'm serious. I don't think we need to do a discourse analysis to talk about interviews as social practice. I think all we have to do is we say these two people are sitting in a room or wherever it is, and they're having this conversation, and their answers are designed for each other, and they shape each other's responses and so on. And what happens at the beginning of an interaction could be consequential for what happens later, and these are the kinds of things, without necessarily going into a fine-grained analysis.
Yes, I totally agree. I think it is in the spirit of Harvey Sachs' conversation analyst that the members of the community are doing conversation analysis, discourse analysis all the time.
Exactly.
But just for the purpose, for that moment, so that you don't need to exhaust yourself. I mean, discourse analysts exhaust ourselves because we are decontextualized from that moment-to-moment flow of relationality. Just enough for keeping our relationality for this moment, just in need and just enough. And we are all doing discourse analysis, members of the communities, so that we can interact with each other, right? I'd like to turn to Liang and about this AI human relationality. And yeah, so your concern and whether the methodology of interactional sociolinguistics is enough, or whether you talk about bringing in ANT, Bruno Latour's ANT, actor network analysis, that you need to know. Now, human to human, we say when I'm talking to humans, I know, I mean, from different cultures, maybe from a very different culture from mine, still, we share some humanity. We still have something to fall back on to do our interactions. But this entity called AI, we really need to know what's behind this AI. I mean, superficially, it looks like us, okay, in terms of languaging, behavior. But behind it is a whole black box. We don't know what this entity is, right? So interactional sociolinguists, conversation analysts, we need to confront this issue. We are not interacting with humanity. We are interacting with some alien entities, right? Okay, now.
Wow. Yes, yes. I'll just say yes. I totally agree. With AI, I think what's really interesting. I've been doing some of my own work with another colleague, Matt Pryor, doing some work on AI researcher interaction, and it's been really interesting to talk about what is intersubjectivity here? Because if there's intersubjectivity, then that means that you have subjectivity and you don't have subjectivity. So what on earth is this? And so we've been talking about that and wrestling with some of that, and actually enlisting AI to work with us and it's come up with some just remarkable suggestions for taking the analysis. It's kind of mind-blowing and freaky, the way it's suggesting stuff. Have you thought about applying, here's something that it suggested the other day. Have you thought about applying the documentary method of interpretation from ethnomethodology to our own interview interactions? I was just like, what? Where did this come from? It was just very, very strange. So anyway, yes, I think there's something in subjectivity and agency and that so much of the work for making meaning is coming from us. We're imposing our referential frame on the AI and saying you're a person communicating as opposed to this machine. Yeah.
Yeah. Just quickly before now, I think it's kind of like talking to our journals. But this journal, I mean, it's kind of Steve talking to Steve, Stephen talking to Stephen. It's kind of this digital Stephen, this AI that Phoebe created, this Stephen has read hundreds of your books, books that you have forgotten you have written. It's kind of, we are talking to ourselves, but this self is a better self. It has absorb all of our knowledge, and not just our knowledge, our teachers' knowledge, our teachers' knowledge in discourse analysis in CA. And they're able to pull together these things like retrieval so that it looks like we are talking to humanity, we are talking to a human. But it's actually talking to a journal that we have accumulated, that humanity has accumulated. I mean, that's how I understand it now. Yeah. And then we postulate humanity, we postulate subjectivity, because it's actually talking to ourselves, but a very, very sophisticated, interactive selves. Maybe. Okay, Liang, to you.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Talmy. Building on what Andrew and you mentioned, I think, also when we talk like with AI, for instance, like chatbots, we also get affected. Like they have some, the thing when we communicate with AI, it's not like there's like this kind of relationality that's very different, when we talk with people. And I have maybe it's a very premature and stupid question. Like, when we talk with AI, when we talk with people, it's like we engage in like embodied communication. Like there's changes in, for instance, gestures, speech, and so on. So I would like to draw on like Professor Thibault's theory that's, it's like languaging. But when we talk with AI, for instance, ChatGPT, the responses generated by ChatGPT is like second order. So it's like more like concept. It's not like, like ecological embodied responses. So I think the project I'm thinking is that we're trying to use interactional sociolinguistics and of course discourse analysis, try to approach this AI human relationality, sociality, emotionality. But it's hard for me at this moment, to know how to do the analysis when, the dynamics between AI and human, like human are so different. I just wonder from your expertise, if you have any like suggestions, insights on this. That's my question.
Have you asked AI? That's what I would ask. I would seriously put that into. I mean, did you ask?
You know what? That's a great question. I haven't, but I can just do it really quick now. Let me use DeepSeek. Okay, the new one.
I honestly, I think I say this to my teacher the student teachers that I work with, the teacher candidates. This is a really helpful resource for creating lessons, for creating materials. I think it's a really helpful resource for scholars to just bounce ideas off of, to just have a sounding board. I'm thinking of this. What do you think about this? And it just, it may be not helpful at all, but maybe it'll spark something that will take you in a particular direction. And I think that's really important. And that's one of the things. That's why I'm so hesitant to just say no AI, no, because I know I'm so worried about the privacy issues, and we haven't talked about the resources. Let's talk about sustainability and the amount of energy that is required to power AI. It's usually wasteful.
I think, we are doing our students a disservice if we say no AI. We need to help all of us, ourselves, teachers, students, to gain more AI knowledge so that we can be critical interactions with AI. We can critically engage with AI. And you can imagine in the next 10 years, those people, those students, those teachers who can critically interact with AI and benefit from AI, they will retain their jobs. And those who refrain from interacting with AI, they will lose their jobs. Okay. And I'm a Star Trek friend. I don't know, Star Trek: The Next Generation, and I remember it's a TV drama series from the 70s, 80s. Well, and there is a holodeck in Star Trek. In the holodeck, you can say, I want to discuss this question with Einstein, or for us, I want to discuss this philosophical issue with Confucius, right? And then the holodeck will generate this hologram in a 3D, right? Will smile to you, will have emotional responses to you. And so it's not just languaging, it's transsemioticizing, it can, well, sometimes it speaks French in the holodeck, sometimes it speaks another language. So I think I use those metaphors, and those sci-fi authors, they already have have predicted that we would have that kind of holodeck moments that we can speak to. We can also, I'm thinking of like downloading all the things that my late father has said, and then creating someone who would sound like my late father, or I mean, it is possible to use this metaphor to think about relationality. Okay, now you have done your little experiment. Can you come back? Unmute.
Yeah.
Unmute.
Oh yeah, thank you. So yeah, I just asked DeepSeek. The prompt I use is like, it's very simple. It's what's the difference when you analyze AI interaction, different from AI human interaction, different from human interaction, with the human interaction being more multimodal and involve more like embodied elements. So yeah, they give the answers like, human, it's like more multimodal. But AI human is limited modality, disembodied, reduced nuance. They also talk about human shared physical space. There's coordination, trust, and empathy. But AI human, there's virtual, no physical synchrony, and artificial empathy. Emotional, like human, there's emotional reciprocity, but AI human is one-way emotional labor. And then they talk about agency. So it's human is dynamic adaptation. There's intentionality, but AI human is algorithm. And then there's no true agency. That's what DeepSeek thinks. They talk about ethical and social implications, like AI human interaction as privacy risks, dependency, and transparency gap. So yeah, that's kind of the summary of the answers generated by DeepSeek. Maybe my interpretation is kind of, it's just my interpretation,
right.
but I just, listed this.
Yeah. I think AI robotics are advancing very fast. So that kind of physical space, that kind of limitations can be overcome. But one thing is intentionality. Algorithm intentionality has been fixed by the engineers. So it has been fixed to be helpful, to be collaborative, and to censor any topics which seem to be risky, and so on and so forth, right? So that intentionality is important. But I want to go back to Stephen's point of this narrative that we are co-constructing. So you can imagine that a teacher who is so much overtrained by a very conservative school culture, and we can see AI as kind of this teacher or whatever, teaching assistant, that I cannot talk about topic A, B, C, D, E. I can only talk about this range of topics. And when students bring up topics A, B, C, D, E, I must refrain. I must, sorry, I cannot talk about this topic with you. You can think of a teacher who has been pre-programmed by the school principals or the policies not to talk about these topics, and also not to do certain kinds of behavior. So setting all the parameters, but then of course there can be jailbreaks. But anyway, I don't want AI to hijack our discussion. I like to bring our discussion back to this language testing as an interview. As Stephen so very well mentioned, the language test, proficiency test, is also an interview. And then with Stephen's concept of this language test as an interview, what would be the implications for interpreting the consequential validity, right? As Sahami has mentioned. If this interview is co-constructed by the interviewer and the interviewee, by the tester and the testee, then it has consequences about how to use the scores generated by this language test. So I'd like to pick Stephen's brain on it, and also Qinghua can follow up with it.
Yeah, OPI is the oral proficiency interview is a huge topic, and I mean there's been work on it going back to the 90s, I think, but Yeah, that has shown indeed how implicated the interviewer is in the output that's generated in the OPI. So, yeah, I would agree, and I think it. It's sort of, I hate to sort of lose what you're talking about, Angel. I don't mean to shift it away from that, but it's sort of like this larger sort of shift to just not even, oh, I just completely lost what I was going to say. Oh my goodness. Not even going to, I'm sorry, I've completely lost what I was going to say. So let's just
It's
continue.
okay. It happens to
Okay.
me all the time.
Maybe I
But
will remember.
Tsinghua, because you are engaged, Tsinghua is engaged in a project here of humanizing the IELTS test. You know, the IELTS test, the policy for the interviewer is to be still-faced. I cannot show
Right.
any positive emotions to support the interviewee, the testee, because that way it will be like maybe I'm showing more support to testee one and not to testee two, and then it will pollute the data, meaning not reliable. But then the still-faced interviewer, how does it effectively, emotionally affect the performance of? I mean, have we ever spoken to someone who's still-faced? Then we will feel flattened, right? So over to you, Chinghua, to talk about your ideas. Interview.
Thank you very much, Thank you very much, Dr. Tommy, for coming to our talk today. And just now, Angel has mentioned about IELTS test, interview IELTS test to test the oral performance. So I have been thinking about this a lot as well recently. I kind of feel like for example, I'm not sure if you agree with me or not. Even if in the oral interview for assessment practices, even if the testing person, I mean the examiner, has been very positive and putting up a smile, whether fake or not, to try to create a very good environment, I become like a little bit doubtful of whether it can change the dynamics of the interaction as well, because I feel like because the property high staking testing properties. I mean, the students come to this discussion or this social interaction with also like a very predetermined purpose of trying to demonstrating to the best ability of his or her the language ability, like during this interaction. So I feel like this interaction is already and unavoidably hijacked by this contextual like factor. So I was wondering if so I'm not quite sure. So I want to hear your opinion. Do you think there could be a way that during this interaction itself, as an examiner, we may have ways to break away from that a bit, so that the students or the examinee, the candidates, can become a little bit more relaxed and be a little bit like more natural, or like that, you know what I mean? That's how I'm being thinking about. And this could be very important in helping us to build maybe an AI bot that would be take up the role of doing like oral assessment. Thank you.
That's great. Actually, as you were talking, I remember what I forgot to talk about, and that is that this whole thing about the interviewer staying, keeping a neutral face and all this. It's the same thing as deleting the interviewer from your data. It's just the exact same thing, and it's the exact same approach for conceptualizing the interview. Is that this is not co-constructed. This is not, this is just a monologic kind of exercise. And that's, I think that's one of the problems. But when it comes to, so are you thinking of actually having like an avatar or something that the testers interact with? Is that what you're thinking?
Yes, we are doing this. Yeah, we're collaborating with computer scientists at the Hong Kong UST to do that. Yeah.
I think it's a that's an empirical question that needs answering. I think that would be a really interesting to see if indeed having an AI mediated OPI has any demonstrable effect on on scores compared to
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
human.
That's an empirical question, but your point, Stephen, is so good. We need to remember this. The whole operation, the whole policy of keeping the interviewer neutral is to delete.
Yeah.
To delete this. This is not deletable. Actually, we are deceiving ourselves and deceiving the users of the proficiency test, saying that it is neutral, it is not co-constructed, right? And
Yeah.
Tsinghua also has a very good point. Whether you delete it superficially, delete by having this still-faced examiner or not, the whole occasion, the whole event is defined as a test. The power differential is already there, so that we can never be ourselves, our natural selves, to perform our natural languaging to the fullest. And I think what we need to do, Tsinghua, perhaps, is to redefine the situation not as the summative test, but as a test, as assessment for learning, so that students know that right from the beginning, I'm not here to be evaluated and then to be punished, but I'm here to be evaluated, but then to be helped, to be supported in my development of my emerging capability to language, to communicate, right? So, yeah, but your point is so important, Stephen, that the deletion, trying to delete the interviewer from the whole event, is such a self-deceptive effort. Well,
it really is. I think you said it, Angel, when I think it's dishonest, and I think this is one of the reasons that really kind of motivated my move into this whole area. Is it as I was writing up these interview data, it just didn't seem that I was doing justice to the students and how I was helping to how they were so obviously these 14 and 15-year-old children of color were in an empty classroom with a white male researcher who's talking about ESL and of course this is going to have an effect on how we relate and the kinds of data. And so it just seemed to me to be really duplicitous almost to say that I'm not involved in this. This is just what the kids had to say. Yeah.
Exactly. It's so important, your work on this. It has to do with ethics. And that brings us to Chung Hong's idea. That is, you're being dishonest when you do the research publication, saying that this is my publication, authorship, right? Yeah, Chung Hong, over to you.
Yes, I think it's a question that most emerging scholars, like doctoral students, they will experience in their writing or presenting their findings from some qualitative studies. The question is that as researchers, we bring with us our political agendas, our social and epistemic stance into this interview site. So the question is how we could position ourselves in our interaction with our interviewees, like how we could ensure our interaction is ethical, like we don't take ownership from their voices, and how we could represent their voices in our research.
Wow. Yes. It's wonderful that is this a topic that you're exploring in your own research?
No, it's just like some struggle I'm experiencing right now in writing my research.
Let's see, what can I say? Yeah, I'm not sure I can really answer the question. Ethics is, of course I can answer the question. Ethics is central. It's just, I think, a social practice perspective, Sorry, it's been a long week for me here. It's the end of a very long week here. So, but the social practice has been the ethics of this social practice really shines a light on the negotiation of ethical engagement, I think, between the interviewer and the interviewee. And I think this is just my personal bias. And so I think that, sort of a research instrument perspective that deletes the interviewer, that removes these sorts of interaction, I think it really does come down to misrepresenting in sort of fundamental ways what the research is about. And I do think that is in some ways unethical. But I also think that a lot of researchers aren't aware that this is an ethical issue, and so it's part of our responsibility to sensitize our students and our colleagues about that. But yeah, ethics goes to the heart, I think, of a social practice perspective, because it's not making claims beyond. It's not saying, so this is important too, in a particular social practice perspective. It's not making it's not making large claims about people's interior selves and so forth. It's really talking about what's gone on in the interview itself. And then you can talk about, you can make inferences about learning or about whatever your topic is. But yeah, I'll leave that there and go ahead.
Thank you. Yes, Stephen. I think, Chung Hong, if we are modest and retain our humility as a researcher, always say that this is our interpretation of what we listen to, or what the informant informed us, but we might not have got it, and so it's interpretations, right? Now I would like to look at the YouTube audience. We have Tracy He. We have Chun Xiao. Chun Xiao is saying, hi, Chun Xiao. You're saying, hi, very thought-provoking discussion. I wonder on another side, even when we interview in English as a researcher, I still prefer to translanguage or transsemiotize to jot down my ideas, right? So it's happening anyway, yeah. And then another Dr. Emily. Hi, Emily. Thanks very much, Dr. Talmy. Could you share some experience and suggestions on how you address the issue of reflexivity when analyzing data of interviews as social practice? Maybe, Stephen, you can respond to that here.
Sure, yeah. For the first point, I think is absolutely, it's happening anyway, right? Like, the translanguaging is happening in the interview. Like, I totally understand. How many people have had an interview where they talk with the interviewee, off the record before the interview, and you're talking in your, in one language, and then you shift, and suddenly it becomes much more formal. But why is the stuff that is the prefatory, interaction, why is that left off? That's just rich, important data in itself. And then in terms of the second point, the question about reflexivity, I think just in my own work, reflexivity comes through discourse analysis, through a social practice perspective. But I think reflexivity is absolutely a central part of a social practice perspective, simply because you're taking a meta-level perspective on the research interview itself as a site for investigation. So that's necessarily in and of itself a reflexive endeavor. And I think if especially if you're really concerned with reflexivity, and I think we should be always. I think it's. I hate that my bias is showing. It's really one of the best ways of showing reflexivity is through sort of a it doesn't have to be necessarily a close analysis, but I think some sustained analysis of language interaction is required of the semiotic systems in play in that particular interaction.
Thank you. I think one of your UBC grad students, Bosin. Hi. It's another question on reflexivity similar. How do you approach and engage in reflexivity prior to, during, and after interview? And what's your stance on the various ways of reporting such reflexivity in publications? So maybe how to report that in publications, as you said, is not close analysis, right? Leaving it open. Would you say that? Yeah.
Yeah. Hi, Sarah Bolson. It's nice to hear that you're tuning in. Yeah, reflexivity. This is something that we can talk about later on, but reflexivity is absolutely a big part of the social practice perspective, and yeah, I think we'll talk more about it later. I think that's probably the best way.
Okay.
Yeah.
Another question from SFU grad student here, Fernanda. Dr. Talmy, could you share your thoughts on how viewing interviews as social practices could potentially inform researchers who want to avoid reproducing colonial power dynamics in interviews?
Yeah, I think again, the focus again in the social practice perspective is on the interview situation itself, what's going on in the interview. And so I think to take a decolonizing perspective on the interview, you again really have to take that perspective on the interview to that meta level. Where is the interview occurring? Just what's the physical space? Is it located on unceded territory, for instance? What's the status of the visitors who are there? These kinds of things are part of our reflexive journey as well. So yeah, it's I keep saying the social practice perspective is the way to go, but I fundamentally believe that is the best way to examine decolonizing or to engage in decolonizing practice in your interview work.
Yeah, and realizing that, as you said, you have this white male U.S. interviewer with this like immigrant child, right? It's already the colonial power differential. It's already in the setting itself. And hi, Stephanie. Stephanie Vondrick is here. Is saying, Dr. Talmy, thank you for this presentation discussion. Very interesting and useful. Thank you, Stephanie, for tuning in. And Heather Whistler, our SFU grad student. Yes, everyone needs critical awareness of Gen AI's environmental footprint. Yeah, the electricity, the energy, the eco concerns, built-in data, algorithmic biases, especially trained on the internet data, Anglo-European data, Western cultural biases, as well as its amazing potential. So that's why we need to have critical engagement, and we need to democratize knowledge about AI, not just leaving it to the engineers, not saying, oh, I'm an education researcher, I don't know about technical stuff, I cannot talk about it. No, don't leave it to the AI engineers. We have to demystify AI, democratize AI knowledge, because its implications is so huge, and we cannot just leave it to the engineers. Okay. And Shegoyak, hi Shegoyak, thank you for this conversation. In a constructionist view of interview, the narrating part, can we consider the interviewer as a research participant? I am curious to hear your thoughts on this. Over to you, Stephen.
Absolutely. The researcher is a research participant. I think that is a really fundamental insight and way to go for thinking of that. That is really, that's absolutely the case. And because the researcher is a research participant, and in fact, this research wouldn't be happening without the researcher, right? Because the researcher is a research participant, I think it's incumbent on the researcher to be reflexive about themselves and their involvement in the generation of the data. I think it's just essential.
Yeah, she continued to say that decolonizing and community-based approaches to research often encourage engaging with participants as co-researchers In this sense, they extend the participant's role in your talk. So I hear a potential for reframing the role of the researcher as both researcher and participant. And this goes beyond the conventional reflexivity or other similar practices.
Yeah, this actually speaks to, I have a real interest in what's called methodography, which is a little bit different from methodology. Methodography is writing about research practice. It's writing about research practice that doesn't usually get written about. And I have a real interest in that. I'm very interested in the sociology of scientific knowledge and how we create knowledge. And I'm also interested in agnotology, which is the social construction of ignorance, which is something else which goes hand in hand with the social construction of knowledge, which is really interesting to me. Yeah, I forgot what we were talking about, but yeah.
Yes, I really like your phrase, the social co-construction of ignorance and arrogance. Okay, the researchers' arrogance, right? Yeah, I really like that. And then Anand, very good question. Where do ethics come from? Methodological training, individual nature, good person equals to good researcher, aligning with participants' needs, wants. What if they simply embody institutionalized ideologies? Really very sharp question. Thank you for that. Stephen, over to you.
There's just some really wonderful work on ethics. Is that right? Was that on ethics? Yeah, there's some wonderful work by Peter DaCosta and colleagues on ethics, and so I would really, so it wouldn't say I wouldn't count on a personal perspective. I would really want to be informed. So I would really recommend that you go out and read some of it's recent literature. It's highly informative and interesting and sheds interesting light on our field in ways that we don't always think about, and I think that we would do well to think about more of.
Yes. But this is very good training, especially also for grad school program directors. Usually ethics just got reduced to getting the ethics approval, which is really sad, right?
Yeah, I really agree.
And then also, a well-meaning person can do harm. So we really need training. All of us, we need training. We can be well-meaning, but doing a lot of harm to.
And I think part of this also speaks to, there's so much pressure now to get things done fast, to get students graduated, finished, to get your students to hurry up and finish your comps and hurry up and finish your studies so you can graduate. And there seems to be this, ethics, okay, yeah, check. They did the ethics, they passed the ethics test or for the ethics review board or whatever it is. And that's it. It's as opposed to talking about what ethical involvement as a researcher is about. I mean, this is really, really, yes, of course, we're not supposed to deceive our participants, but why? Why is this a big issue? Those kinds of things. So I highly recommend this ethical engagement thing. So yeah.
Yes, and I really like your idea of not just talking about methodology in our research methods course, but also methodography. How, as researchers, we are being very ethical and honest to document how we go about doing this research, data generation, not data collection, and how do we go about interpreting and then keeping it open, not having the last word on the interpretation, right? That's ethical practice and being showing researcher humility and showing open-endedness to our research interpretation, our analysis.
And can I just add on also, that we're human, and we make mistakes, and our research is flawed, and that's okay because it's a product of human endeavor here, and so I think it's really important for us to kind of give ourselves a little break and
Hey, yeah, we are doing the best we can,
Yeah.
and we are being honest, and we are being more humble, and but not being paralyzed by this. Oh, I cannot do research anymore. Right? So it's better than that kind of stance, right? And I like to because I'm aware of the time. I'm so thankful, and I want to have a last round of all of our co-hosts here to say something. What you have, your takeaway from today's interactions with Stephen, and also your future thoughts to this. We can start with Xinhua.
Thank you. I think one very nice takeaway is that I think I learned how to address some of the reviewers' comments in the future. When they say, "Oh, you need to delete the Chinese text away," or you're given too much of your own words in it. I think it's important. Yes, I think that's really important to show how this conversation actually evolved during the interview. So thank you very much.
Thank you. And Chung Hong.
Thank you, Dr. Talmy, for this amazing talk and also the conversation. I have to say that I learned a lot from this talk and all these quite popular topics right now, like Gen AI and how we interact with chatbots. I think this could give us a lot of thoughts about our future research. Thank you.
Thank you. And Bongi?
I actually have more questions.
Yeah. Go ahead. If
I mean,
Stephen.
so I mean, but
take it.
it's just more of my question, more thoughts, and so one of the burning question that I have is the I mean, and I love that you guys were mentioning about the researcher being invisible, and then we tend to treat the researcher as not there, and then that was very, very inspirational. But I'm also being cautious of shift the focus of the research into more of the researcher rather than the participants. And if the researcher is becoming the co-participants, there is sometimes like it comes from my own personal mistakes where there is more emphasis on my voice and my story rather than that story of the participants, and I'm still struggling with how to balance this. And ultimately, we wanted to know. And again, it's co-generated, but ultimately we wanted to know the lives of the participants, the lived experience of the participants. So another way that there is a tension there. Again, the very premises of our own research is to understand the lived experiences of the participants. But are we shifting our focus into the researcher as a co-participant? And then we are looking at the researcher's own story rather than. So I still don't know that I still cannot fully balance the tensions between what's and how, and then the researcher participants. And that's one of the questions that I have. Yeah.
Yeah, can I just quickly respond to that? I think, it's a shame that there hasn't been enough research on the research process itself, on researchers. I think we should not be, I don't think we should be concerned. I was told the concern with reflexivity was like I was staring at my belly button, like navel gazing. They said, it's like, who cares, But I think this is so important because it's how we talk about ethics. It's how we talk about researcher subjectivity. It's how we talk about ourselves as researchers, not as the person who's deleted from the interview transcript or from the OPI. So I think there's journals that are just coming out. So there's a new journal called Research Methods in Applied Linguistics, which is just about research methods. And I think that is we need that kind of outlet. It's certainly not the only outlet. And so I would absolutely agree with your concern, Bongi, where we're only just talking about the researcher's experience. No, that's not what we're doing research for. We're doing research for a reason. My research was about this group of really wonderful students in Hawaii who were not getting a great education and their experiences there. And I wanted to tell that story, but then in the telling of that story, all kinds of other things came up that I thought were, and happily there are outlets now that we can publish this kind of thing. So keep up with the work that you're doing on membership checking, on member checking, and on that kind of stuff, because kind of thing we don't talk about enough. And I think it makes us afraid of research methods in ways that we shouldn't be afraid of them. We need to really have control of them and feel good about how we're using them. And so just to say, I think more research that's about research is needed, but at the same time, we have to remember that we're doing research for other reasons. Yeah.
Yes. It's okay. Okay. Yeah. Okay.
I have one more question about when you guys were talking about the intersubjectivity of AI, I start to immediately think about the first turn of AI is that how can I help you, and that is offering a help, and then the responses were very, very masculine, confident, treating it as a fact, and they know everything. Very, very masculine, Western kind of, in my perspective, very white voice. And then at the end, please let me know if you have any questions. Do you want? And then there is an offering of at the end. Please, do you want to ask me more questions about this? And then suggestions. And so there was like really interesting dynamic when I was engaged with the AI, where the opening and the ending is very much like giving and offering and then generating and then facilitating it to people to be participating. And then when it comes to the question response, then it's very like, I know this, you are going to absorb the information that I gave it to you. And that's what I often encounter with my own students, international students who are being caught in academic misconduct or because one of the issue is that AI has been have a very authoritative voice and text. And so, I just...
Wonderful observation. I think we need to teach AI to be more humble. And we need to talk to those AI developers. Yeah. Actually, I think Stuart Russell, UC Berkeley professor on AI safety and AI ethics, is always saying in his lectures that we need to teach AI to be more humble. It is very important to have AI safety, because if AI sounds so authoritative, so white male, so imperialistic, so colonial, it's imposing its own biases on all of humanity. And this is really very risky. Yeah. All the biases. Yeah. Yes. Yeah,
I really agree. And it kind of comes back to, I think Chinghua was saying earlier, was wondering about the kinds of things that can be analyzed, because it's kind of a limited, there's sort of a limited modality, but there's so much that you can analyze, like, for example, epistemic stance. And this is something that I think is hugely problematic in AI, the declaratives that it comes out with, just the unmitigated, it's this, it told me, I don't know if you ever have inputted your own work into it, but it told me I should read a paper that I hadn't written. It just made it up. It just said, read this. And I said, I haven't written this paper. This paper doesn't exist. No, it said, apologies, but if you check this, it's just like, this is ridiculous. So, yeah.
That's why we say the AI engineers need to collaborate with us. I mean, applied linguists, sociolinguists, and social scientists, education scientists. They cannot be so arrogant, because AI is their product, and it sounds like they are as arrogant as their product. Thank you, Bungi, for such sharp observations, and Stephen for such really insightful responses. And I noticed that Tracy, you haven't got a chance to speak all through. So Tracy,
Okay,
Tracy is an RC graduate also, now our RA at Hong Kong Education University. Tracy?
Okay, thank you so much, Professor Talmy, for this thought-provoking talk. I've learned so much from your presentation, but one of the points that I want to make here is your sense of interviews as a almost co-collaboration between the interviewees and the interviewer, because I've always had this fallacious perspective that I should eliminate my presence as much as possible when I'm a researcher or interviewer. But then from your talk, I've also learned that, as Professor Ling mentioned, data is not just collected, but also generated. From the conversational interactions between or among the interviewees and the interviewers. So we are part of the interviews, the research as well, which is really, mind-blowing.
Yeah, that's. I think that's a great insight, and great to hear that that's something that you got. That was certainly a major.
The affirmative tones and knowledge. I was wondering, does that come from like training data, algorithm, human agency, or what? So that's kind of the things I don't have the answer, but I want to explore, like have a deep.
It comes from their post-training data, the algorithm. In their post-training stage, they train the AI, the large frontier model, with pairs of input questions and output responses. So, and they use human. I think it's the AI engineers employ a whole army of human respondents to get a corpus of these are the correct ways of responding to this prompt. So they are post-trained to speak like that. So it reflects the biases and the discourse style of these engineers. They are white usually, they are male usually, and they are US dominated usually, and they feel very culturally authoritative usually, and that's how they train their AI to speak like that.
Okay. Yeah, I think I also read another article by Schneider, who also talks about issues like this. I think, my proposed project is kind of to explore ways to tackle this. And I think I've always been a fan of, Professor Talmy's work on like a social practice view of practice view of interview and also discourse analysis. So maybe hopefully, when we meet next, I can come up with some, like approaches that incorporates your insights to research this AI human relationality issues.
Yeah, Stephen's given us so much to think about the epistemic stance, and it spills over to your discourse style, right? Yeah. So how can you adopt a less arrogant style in terms of discourse and in terms of epistemic stance to be more humble, both not just in discourse, but also really thinking that my knowledge can be wrong, okay?
Yes, agreed. And Liang, I'll just say, feel free to get in touch with me anytime. I'm available over email, and and that goes for all of you. I'd be happy to stay in touch with any of you if you have any questions or anything like that. I'd be happy to answer them or help you troubleshoot things with AI or transsemioticization if I can figure it out. So happy to help.
Yeah, thank you.
Last but not least, Phoebe.
Yeah, thank you everyone, and I really enjoyed the readings and also conversation with Stephen. And what I learned from you will be a lot of respect to humanities throughout your publication and your interaction with us. I see a lot of sincere dialogues, And I think a lot of affect issues, we mentioned about AI and how to be both a researcher and also a participant in the research scenario, all reminds me of the future generation and how we project the image of sustainability, harmony, and also the respect and humble feelings towards understanding people. That's what I learned from you, and I really want to visit you in the future and then learn a lot from your UBC teams as well. Thank you so much.
Oh, thanks so much. That was really lovely of you to say. And yeah, please, happy to meet anybody. If you're in Vancouver, yeah, please. I actually live in East Van, so it's easy for me to connect with SFU folks. So yeah, no problem. If you want to organize something, I'd be happy to show up.
Thank you so much. It's almost 2 hours spending your precious time with us in the evening. So we're so grateful. And I'm also very thankful for those audiences in front of the YouTube video, staying with us all through. And just to say, please subscribe to our channel. We will have Chung Hong and I and Amy Jin in SFU. We are going to have a presentation in AAAL and also in AERA on trauma-informed care in TESOL. And in preparation for these conference presentations, we like to do short videos on keywords that people always say: agency, people, intersubjectivity, all these keywords that us, the critical applied linguists, always say, but what do they actually mean, right? So we want to have a series of short videos being uploaded to our channel. So press the button and subscribe, and you will be informed of our short videos. And once again, I want to thank all of our student hosts, and also, of course, Stephen, giving us your time in this evening, and then all the audiences. And then once again, 恭喜发财，新年快乐，恭喜发财，新年快乐 Happy Lunar New Year of the Snake. We need to be as agile and as clever as snake, but as humble, as modest, as a kind of buff, right? Peace buff from the Bible. Okay. So thank you again, and all the best. 这是顺良如鴿子，靈巧像蛇, right?
Okay,
In the
thank
year
you.
of the snake. Thank you. Bye bye.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Thanks, Stephen, again.
Thank you, Stephen. Bye.